What's up, guys? It's Tony here. Welcome back to Man Cave Studios. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be talking about another sports subject because I like talking about sports. So we are going to be talking about champions and determining who is a champion in professional sports. So, in other countries besides the United States where I live, they usually determine champions by some sort of like straightforward playoff bracket, or just whoever finishes at the top of a league by the end of the season. So for example, the most famous leagues in the world really are the English Premier League, German Bundesliga, Spanish La Liga, Italian Serie A. And the way that they determine the champions in those sports is every team plays each other twice. Granted, those are smaller countries, so it's easier to move around. But every team plays each other twice, and at the end of the season, whoever's first place in the league wins the championship. Formula One, which is the most famous league of anything anywhere, I would imagine, except maybe UEFA Champions League. Formula One, best racing league of the world. What do? They go around the world. At the end of whatever it is now, 36, 34 races, whoever has the most points, which is determined the same way for every track, winner gets 25 points, second place gets, I think, 18, 15 for third place, downward to 10th. Whoever has the most points at the end of the season wins the championship. Very straightforward. And the best driver in F1 usually wins. The best team in the English Premier League always wins, or in any of those soccer leagues. Champions League, I think, is the only thing where there's a little bit of a difference, but they still have these sort of round-robin tournaments to begin with, the group stages, that determine who the best teams are. And it can get a little fluky sometimes. I mean, like the Champions League final is only one match, but the other matches leading up to it, outside of the group stage, are two matches, one home and one away. And whoever scores the most goals in those two matches wins. So it's not just, if you have a bad day, you're done. You can come back, and you've got another chance to prove that you're worth getting into the next round. And I think since they especially did away with away goals, no pun intended, although I would have liked it if I did think of that in advance. But, they make sure that the right winner advances in Champions League, all the way up to the final, which is kind of like the Super Bowl, except more famous. In American sports, we do things a little bit different. Everything is determined by a playoff bracket. Champions League, that makes sense. Because you're not just going to, teams already have enough competitions on their hands. They've got the domestic cup, which doesn't really mean anything. They've got the regular league that they're in within the country. So the English Premier League, for example. And then on top of that, the FA Cup. But also Champions League and whatever else, Carabao Cup. There's a lot of different tournaments going on. You're not going to have, whatever it might be, 12 teams playing each other twice in a season. So the easiest way to do it is a playoff bracket. In the United States, everything is determined by a playoff bracket. So you just even look at the MLS, soccer, in the United States. As opposed to European soccer, the champion for American soccer is not determined by who has the most points at the end of the regular season. Otherwise, the Union would be MLS Cup champions, which would be great because they've won the Supporters' Shield. It's determined by who wins the MLS Cup, by who gets through a playoff bracket and wins the ultimate championship. And I feel like a lot of Americans get confused about this. Because in other leagues that they probably grew up watching, it's always the winner of the regular season. However, at the same time, in every other sport in the United States, it's always a playoff bracket. So I think that people celebrate the Supporters' Shield way too much, way more than they should. And then the funny thing is that the last 2 years, the Supporters' Shield winner has been out in the first round that they've played in. The Union in 2020 lost to New England. New England in 2021 lost to NYCFC after they had like 3 weeks off. So, the winner of MLS Cup isn't always the winner of the regular season. And the winner of the regular season is the best team in the league. Maybe you can make an exception. Sorry, my phone's ringing behind me, of course. But maybe you can make an exception with... I don't even remember what I was saying. Oh my god. Whatever. But the point is, like, if you look at leagues like the NHL, where the champion is determined based off of a playoff bracket where more than half of the teams make the playoffs, the best team never wins the Stanley Cup final. I think this year might be the only case that you can make for the right team winning the Stanley Cup final. Because this year, the Colorado Avalanche were the best team in the Western Conference, and to win the Stanley Cup, they beat a team that swept the team that was the best in the regular season. So, but in previous years, and I don't even remember the last time a President's Trophy winner won the Stanley Cup, but in previous years, the best team has not won the Stanley Cup final. Last year, Colorado Avalanche won the President's Trophy and the Tampa Bay Lightning won the Stanley Cup. Year before that, I think it was the Boston Bruins won the President's Trophy. That was a weird COVID year. Again, Lightning won the Stanley Cup. 2019, every first seed was out in the first round. And the winner of the Stanley Cup, I think, was a second or third seed in their division. St. Louis Blues. President's Trophy winner never wins the Stanley Cup in the NHL. In the NBA, that's the only thing that's different because it's the same players going out there. So, the NBA is more of a... I don't know what you would call it. It's more of a player-oriented league than a team-oriented league. But even still, at the same time, there are years where the best team in the league doesn't win the championship. Like the Golden State Warriors in 2015-2016 season. They were the best team in NBA history, and they didn't win the NBA Finals. They weren't the champions. They were by far the best team in the league, the best team in history. They were even better than the Chicago Bulls when they went 72-10. Warriors didn't even lose 10 games that year, but they didn't win the championship. NFL. Sometimes the best team in the league wins the Super Bowl. Other times, like 2019, you get teams that go 11-5 and still somehow win the Super Bowl, even though there were teams better than them in the playoffs. So the point is, like, and then obviously MLB, you get some fluky winners sometimes too, like the Washington Nationals in 2019. Often with the MLB, the difference is that it's a big spending market. There's no salary cap, so you get the same teams every year, which makes the MLB a little bit boring. But we don't determine champions in sports by who the best team is. And the question is, should we? What is too much? What is going too far in determining playoff brackets? Let me tell you guys something. My college's conference, they do a baseball and softball tournament in a double elimination format. So what that means is if you lose one game, you still move on to play another one. You're only out if you lose 2 games. I think that's stupid. I think that's really like a really weird way of determining a champion. Because when you get to the winner's bracket final, don't you think that the team that wins that should be the champions? Don't you think that the team that ultimately beats, and the other thing is, if the team that loses wins in the loser's bracket, and the two wind up playing again in the final, but the team that lost the first game wins, then how do you determine who the better team is? And my conference does a thing where, if in the off chance that happens, they add an extra game, but there are some tournaments that don't. And it's just a really weird way of doing it to begin with. Like, alright, you've played 2 extra games, or an extra game, for what? Like, the loser in the winner's bracket final goes on to play in the grand final, and they lose again. So they've played, 2 extra games for nothing? Just to determine the same outcome? If you're going to do a bracket, it should be straightforward. Or you should do it just by who was the better team in the regular season. I go to Rider University. Best team in the conference last year, 2021, was Fairfield. Rider beat Fairfield, and granted, Fairfield was nationally ranked. Like, they only lost 1 game, I think, in the regular season. They were the best team in the league by far. Rider beat them in the tournament. In the tournament at the end of the season. Does that mean that Rider was a better team? No, but they got a spot in the NCAA tournament. But they definitely were not the better team. You had a team that was nationally ranked. Rider wasn't nationally ranked. None of the other teams in the conference were nationally ranked. They still won the tournament. And that's what I mean. Because I think people give the Supporter Shield in MLS too much credit, even though we don't determine sports that way. But I think if you're going to give a trophy to a team for being the best in the regular season, then it better be the championship trophy. Because, you don't see teams celebrating with the President's Trophy in the NHL after they win the Stanley Cup. Or after the regular season ends, You don't see a trophy even being handed out for the best team in the regular season for the MLB or NBA or NFL. No one makes a big deal out of it because it doesn't matter. Because it's whoever wins the championship after the playoffs. And there are some leagues that get it completely wrong. Like NASCAR. NASCAR is an example of prioritizing entertainment over anything else, over determining a proper champion. And if you're not familiar with NASCAR, here's their system. The best 6, I was saying before about Formula 1. In NASCAR, the best 16 teams, or 16 drivers, qualify for the playoffs. And there are 3 races, and then the 4 drivers with the lowest points get knocked off. And then there are 3 more races, and then the next 4 drivers with the lowest points get knocked off. But at this point, you have 8 drivers. At the end of that, the field gets cut in half, from 8 to 4. So if you don't do well, and granted, points reset at the end of every round, basically. Like, you get points in the regular season for wins and stage wins, but points reset at the end of every round. So if you didn't have many points in the regular season, you have a disadvantage. But at the same time, if you crash in one of these races, then you lose any advantage that you may have had, which has happened before, like Kevin Harvick last year. Best driver in the regular season, didn't even make the Final Four. So the field gets cut in half because of 3 races. So if you don't do good in those 3 races, even though you were really good in the regular season, you're done. For the championship race, it doesn't matter how many points you had in the regular season. There's 4 drivers, and whoever finishes highest in the final race of the season is a champion. Out of 4 drivers, 3 of which could have had better seasons. But it doesn't matter. It's just up to that one race. Last year, Kyle Larson won the championship. He should have. He was the best driver in the regular season. 2 years ago, Chase Elliott won the championship. Did he deserve it? Depends on who you ask. He won the championship, but he wasn't the best driver. Kevin Harvick was, and Denny Hamlin was second. The best driver doesn't always win the championship in NASCAR. The best teams don't always win the championship in American sports, where we have playoff brackets. And what I was kind of referencing before was, where do you find that balance between entertainment and determining a proper champion in sports? And I think that some leagues, like the NHL, they benefit greatly off the Stanley Cup playoffs because anything can happen. And no one questions the legitimacy of the team that wins the Stanley Cup, even if they weren't the best team. Like the 2012 Los Angeles Kings. Granted, they went 16-4, but the same Los Angeles Kings in 2014 had a tough time in the entirety of the playoffs. Took them the longest time that it took any team to win the Stanley Cup final. But they still won it, and no one questions the legitimacy of them winning the Stanley Cup that year. No one talks about who won the President's Trophy in 2014 or who should have been the rightful champions. That year or any other year. No one talks about who should have been the Western Conference champions in 2017. Other leagues get it completely wrong, where it's very clear who the best teams are, and no one really cares enough about the playoffs because the playoffs aren't that entertaining, or there's just not as much interest. Like with the MLS, the best team right now is Los Angeles FC, without a doubt. They're the best team in the league. They just added 2 new pieces, Gareth Bale and the captain from Italy, I can't remember his name, Chiellini. They just added those 2 players. They're easily the best team in the league, but they still might not win MLS Cup this year because it's single game elimination. So if they have one bad game, they're done. And that would be, unless the Union win MLS Cup, that would be quite disappointing for me and for everybody else. So, I kind of just bring that up, at what point does the bracket or the logic behind determining a champion become so flawed that you're not actually determining who's the best anymore? Because the other argument is that it's about playing under pressure. But pressure doesn't have anything really to do with how good you are at a sport to begin with. And you could have the same type of, I don't know what you want to call it, like standings board that determines a champion, and that could still work out sometimes. Like this past year, the Florida Panthers and Colorado Avalanche battling at the end of the NHL season for the President's Trophy. That could have been your championship right there, and that would have been really entertaining. Some years there are teams that are separated by 1 game or less in the NBA, the MLB. Why don't you determine champions that way? And then the MLB is adding another team to the playoff mix this year. And in the National League, that team might be the Philadelphia Phillies, who haven't made the playoffs in 11 years. Do they deserve to be in the playoffs? I don't know. What I've seen so far doesn't tell me that they do. What I've seen so far tells me that they're just going to benefit off of this new deal, this new collective bargaining agreement. And I doubt they're going to win the World Series, but I guess we'll see. I think the MLB would wind up benefiting from less teams in the playoff mix. That way the bar is higher. That way you get, let's just say, 8 teams total. You know, instead of adding a team this past year, maybe they reduced it by a team. So you have a quarterfinals, a semifinals, and then a championship. I think that would work out better than having a best of 3, a best of 5, and then a best of 7. So the series get progressively longer. For what? For what reason? For entertainment value? At this point, you're not determining who the best team is anymore. You're just trying to add more entertainment value. Is that really the purpose behind the sport? From one angle it is, but you're not determining who the best team is anymore. And I think more people are interested in who the best team is rather than these weird, funky playoff brackets. If this team wins this game, they play this team. But if they win and another team wins, then they play this other team. It's stupid. I think when you start adding different pieces, it becomes stupid, for lack of a better term. It becomes to the point where you're not, you're losing people. You're losing people and you're not adding any additional entertainment. When you start talking about wild cards and teams moving on to play either a higher or lower seed depending on who wins each game, that's when it gets really dumb, I think. If you're going to do a playoff bracket, it should be a multiple of, or it should be some exponential value of teams where each team lines up to play another team at every level. So if you want to do an 8-team playoff bracket, like the MLB, but with one less team, like the MLB basically during the division series and onward, or what used to be the division series. If you want to do a 16-team playoff bracket, I think that's a little much because then half of the league is making the playoffs. So if you get one of those bottom 8 teams, you're not actually determining who the best team was at that point. I think starting it with a quarterfinal and going to a semifinal and a final, that's the best way at determining who the best in a sport is. And sometimes, like in tennis, they have multiple tournaments a year. So they're not actually trying to determine a champion necessarily. Or what I mean is they're not trying to determine who the best player is or players in doubles. They're just doing it entirely for entertainment value. But anyways, I guess that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, how we should determine champions in sports. Make sure to like this video, subscribe for more, and peace out, broskies.